James eased into his economy class seat for the extended flight to Denver, already drained from his demanding business week. In the row behind him, 8-year-old Tommy started persistently hammering his seat back while his mother, Vanessa, paid no attention whatsoever to the disturbance. Following 2 hours of unsuccessful attempts to address the problem courteously, James devised a tactical approach. When Tommy launched his next forceful kick, James stood prepared with his strategy. James Parker had been anticipating this flight with pleasure. Following an exhausting week filled with consecutive meetings, his only desire was to rest during the 6-hour trip to Denver. He pulled himself aboard the aircraft, located his economy seat, and sank into it with gratitude. That's when it began. A sudden jolt struck the rear of his seat. Then came another. James lifted his eyelids, assuming someone was getting comfortable behind him, but the jolts persisted. Steady, intentional. James rotated to identify the cause of his suffering. An 8-year-old boy occupied the seat directly behind his position, legs moving freely. The youngster was methodically striking his seat with the vigor of someone keeping rhythm. The aircraft rolled along the runway. The kicking persisted. James attempted to disregard it, adjusting his posture. Perhaps the child would exhaust himself once they were airborne. 20 minutes elapsed. The kicks didn't just persist, they grew stronger. James chose to address this diplomatically. He turned around wearing a cordial smile and mentioned that the kicking was preventing him from resting properly. The child gazed back with a grin that appeared unnaturally sophisticated for an 8-year-old. Without averting his gaze, the boy launched another kick. This strike was more powerful than all the previous ones together. James sensed his composure beginning to fracture, but certainly the boy's mother would intervene at this point. The woman seated beside the child was Vanessa. She looked to be in her 30s, fashionably attired with a tablet showing a vibrant puzzle game. James made a small sound to get her attention and spoke to her directly. He described the situation, maintaining his respectful manner. Vanessa lifted her eyes from her tablet for precisely 2 seconds. She gestured with her hand in dismissal and informed James that boys would be boys. She implied he was overreacting to typical childhood conduct. Then she instantly resumed her game. The rejection was executed so nonchalantly that he nearly failed to comprehend it. Behind him, the child laughed and launched another kick. James observed the elderly woman next to him expressing disapproval with a headshake, but her criticism wasn't aimed at the child or his mother. She was watching James with obvious judgment, whispering about grown-ups who lacked tolerance for children. James dropped back into his seat, feeling caught in a bad dream. The kick started up instantly, now with increased energy. The boy had evidently understood his mother's dismissal as authorization to intensify his behavior. James attempted every approach he could conceive. He modified his seat position forward, backward, upright. Nothing made a difference. An hour went by. The kicks had formed a rhythm by now. 3 rapid taps, then a break, then 1 forceful kick. James signaled for a flight attendant. A pleasant woman arrived with a practiced smile. James described the situation softly, hoping she could step in tactfully. The flight attendant proceeded to Vanessa's row and conversed in low tones. James couldn't catch the exchange, but he could observe Vanessa's posture. Arms folded, head moving side to side. The flight attendant came back to James with a regretful look. She clarified that she had addressed the family, but there wasn't much additional action she could take. She proposed James might attempt requesting a different seat. James inquired about open seats. The flight attendant consulted her tablet and verified what he had already anticipated. The aircraft was entirely occupied. Another hour dragged past. James had given up trying to rest. The kicks had consumed his entire focus. He discovered himself predicting each strike, his body growing tense in readiness. James surveyed his fellow travelers. Most were resting or engaged with their entertainment devices. Nobody wished to become involved. Meanwhile, Vanessa had transitioned from her tablet game to a shiny fashion periodical. She browsed through the content at her leisure, utterly unaware of her son's conduct. Occasionally the child would stop long enough that James believed it had ended, only to launch a surprise kick precisely as James began to settle. 2 hours had elapsed since departure. James was approaching his limit. He had attempted patience. He had attempted courtesy. He had attempted proper procedures. Nothing had succeeded. But James wasn't someone who surrendered readily. When confronted with difficult clients or unreasonable expectations, he discovered inventive solutions. He started to examine the circumstances with his logical mind. What assets did he have at his disposal? What would represent a victory? The solution arrived to him abruptly, like a sudden realization. It was ingenious in its straightforwardness. He wouldn't need to violate any regulations or create a disturbance. He would simply need flawless timing. James signaled for the flight attendant once more. The same woman came over. James made a straightforward request. He asked for a bottle of water and a plastic cup. The flight attendant appeared somewhat puzzled but complied. She came back with both items, commenting on how patient James had remained throughout this situation. James unsealed the water bottle with care. He transferred the transparent liquid into the plastic cup, filling it approximately 3/4 full. He kept the cup balanced in his right hand. Now arrived the critical moment. James had been tolerating the kicks for more than 2 hours. He understood the sequences. He understood the rhythm. He waited. The cup of water remained completely motionless in his grip. To any observer, he merely appeared like a man preparing to take a sip. The child's legs moved back and forth behind him. James could detect the rhythm developing. 3 small kicks, a pause, then the large one. James tightened his muscles, prepared to carry out his plan. He had a single opportunity at this. The timing needed to be completely precise. The child pulled his leg backward for the forceful kick that consistently came after the sequence. The kick arrived with maximum force, exactly as James had anticipated. But this time James stood ready. At the precise instant of contact, he intentionally thrust his arm upward as though the kick had shocked him and made him lose his grip. The cup of water sailed from his grasp in a flawless trajectory. The transparent liquid splashed spectacularly over his seat back, saturating through to the row behind him. Water poured down onto Vanessa's costly fashion periodical, thoroughly soaking the shiny pages. Droplets scattered across her designer top. Vanessa jumped from her seat as if she'd received an electric shock. Her expression displayed shock and rage. She whirled around to confront James, her mouth parting to release what was unmistakably going to be a verbal attack. But before she could utter a word, James turned around with composure. His voice carried loudly enough for adjacent passengers to hear distinctly. He expressed deep regret for the accident, clarifying that her son's kick had made his hand move involuntarily. He noted that this was precisely what he had been attempting to avoid for the previous 2 hours. The surrounding passengers had observed everything. A businessman in the opposite aisle gave James an approving nod. A mother traveling with cooperative children directed disapproving glances at Vanessa. Even the elderly woman next to James, who had previously judged him, now appeared uncomfortable. Vanessa's mouth parted and shut like a fish removed from water. She glanced around at the expressions focused on her. Several witnesses had observed her son launch the kick at the precise instant of the accident. The flight attendant materialized swiftly with towels. She presented them to Vanessa while tactfully proposing that perhaps the child might find pleasure in viewing the scenery outside instead of fidgeting. The implication was unmistakable. The mood in their area transformed dramatically. The child himself appeared to understand that something essential had shifted. The activity was no longer entertaining. For the first time in more than 2 hours, his legs remained motionless. The final 3 hours of the flight proceeded in wonderful silence. The child remained quiet, periodically glancing anxiously at James. Vanessa avoided meeting the gaze of other passengers. James went back to his work wearing a subtle smile of contentment. He had resolved an impossible dilemma without violating any regulations. And you? What action would you have taken if confronted with such a challenge and an uncooperative parent?